Hello and welcome to our Lunch and Learn session that we're holding today at the King's Fund on Be the Change, How to Lead with Accountability and Anti-Racism. My name is Anne-Marie Archard and I'm a senior consultant here at the King's Fund, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by my colleague Joy Warmington. Joy, I'll let you say hello and introduce yourself.
Hello everyone. It feels really weird because I can't see you all, but I'm pretending that you're out there. I'm Joy Warmington. I'm the CEO of BRAP. We're an equality and human rights charity, and we have been working with King's Fund in the development of anti-racist practice and development of work that supports people to understand anti-racism, especially in relation to leadership.
Thanks, Joy. A small housekeeping piece of information for you. Just to note that today, if you do want to connect with us, please use the Q&A function, and we will be having space for questions at the end of the session. We'd really like to hear what you would like to know as well. So we're going to take probably about 45 minutes sort of sharing some things. We're also going to do an interactive poll that we hope will work, because we'd like to hear a bit about your experiences. But use the Q&A function rather than the chat, and we are looking forward to hearing what's coming up for you around this topic. Where are you? What are the sorts of questions and challenges that you're facing when you're really thinking about how you lead with accountability and anti-racism? In terms of this work, and Joy and I have worked together in this space for a little while now, we just want to acknowledge that working in anti-racism is both emotionally and intellectually demanding, and it asks us to reflect deeply, sit with discomfort, and really interrogate ourselves and what it means for us. And we will all have slightly different experiences, and what we want to do is to enable you to bring some of those out, and we will be bringing out and sharing our experiences and our thinking in this space. And we're going to be touching on some quite complex and what can be confronting ideas as well. And because we've only got an hour, we're literally only going to scratch the surface. So we want to sort of recognise that there is much more that sits underneath this and that might leave you with more questions than you have. So we'll also give you access to some resources at the end of the session. Joy, anything else that you want to say about this work and this conversation that we're going to have?
No, really. I would just echo what you've said, Anne-Marie. It's really complex. It's hot. So it can be quite challenging to have this conversation in neutral ways, and often we welcome in the emotion, because I think the emotion is actually quite important in terms of the work.
Great. Thanks, Joy. I think we're going to ask people perhaps why they're here. Over to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So we thought we'd try and do this. I'm crossing everything. You won't be able to see this, but I'm crossing everything that our colleague Naseem is managing to do the poll. But we thought it'd be really lovely to hear from you, and to just ask you why you're here. So there are a number of questions, and you can tick other reasons if you want and write the free text. So the first is you don't think you know enough, or you're skilled enough in this area, that you might be representative of or work in an organisation where you don't think you're making enough questions, or enough progress on anti-racism, or progress on addressing racism and therefore being anti-racist. It could be because you feel this is a very complex area, so you're taking this opportunity because this is been headed as a lunch and learn session to learn more, or there is another reason. So fingers crossed, if you would like to hit those questions, whichever one feels speak to you, and hopefully the poll will work.
And just to say that the poll is anonymous, so we can't see who's voting. So if you are able to respond, and I'm hoping that you can see it, you might have to click on something to access it. Can see 2 responses, so it looks like a couple of people can see it. So I'm really hoping that that'll work. Great, a few more coming through now. And if you can't see the poll and you're struggling, feel free to let us know in the Q&A as well, your response. So if it is that you don't think you know enough, you're not skilled enough, you feel this area is a bit complex, or you're perhaps, concerned that we're not making the progress, or there's another reason, then you can put them in the Q&A as well, because I'm only seeing a few responses coming through. So I suspect that people are having trouble actually accessing the poll. Technology is brilliant when it works, not so good when it lets us down. So I think I can see some people coming now in the Q&A, and Nazim has put the questions in. So if you are able to see the Q&A and you wanted to give us a response on any of those areas, that would be really helpful as well.
Having said that it was a good idea to do the poll, I'm not actually seeing much movement. It does look like 33% of those who voted have said that they don't think they're enough or they're not skilled enough in the area. But nothing's changed for me. Has anything changed for you, Anne-Marie, in the poll?
No. So I think it's probably not working. So maybe we'll come back to that if people have got any responses to those questions, or maybe there are things that are starting to come up for you. Even just thinking about those, why are you here? What did you want to know? And what did you want to get out of this session? Then that might help you.
Well, there's a few in the chat, which
yeah, people basically saying they can't see the poll. So apologies.
Yeah, there's a few people that have said they feel the area is complex, so they're taking any opportunity to learn. And there's some new posts. People are saying they're interested to learn more about it. Can't see the questions. Apologies. Can't see the poll. So we're going to have to double test. We did test it, actually. It was working when we tested it.
So apologies for that. We'll stick with it and we'll move on to the next part of today in terms of the conversation that we wanted to have. And in the meantime, the questions are in the Q&A. So if you do want to respond, or if that's helping you to sort of think, why have I come today? Because I think that, it's always helpful for us, because we want to try and ensure that we're going to talk about things that are useful for you. So please let us, know if there is something coming up for you. So I can see somebody said, I've got a team member, I think it's Kate, who's made comments recently, I'd like to lead some training for the team. So those sorts of things sound like they're important. Trust is wanting further learning around the topic. So, it sounds like people are, they're interested in this. You're here because this is a topic that is important to you and there's things that you want to discuss. We're going to move on to talk about, perhaps how do we improve upon the sort of inequalities that exist within our organisations, particularly from a race perspective? And Joy, I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit around, give us a bit of a grounding definition of what, racism means for you within organisations and perhaps how it shows up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it can be quite challenging for people to actually understand how racism operates. Partly because I don't think we've had a very good grounding in our understanding of racism. So I'm always quite surprised when I start this work and we've started this work together, Anne-Marie, and we might ask people to define what racism is, and there's always a little bit of a struggle to get some clarity about what we mean when we talk about racism. Most people can define racism overtly, so we can often name some of the overt racism that we see, but find it really difficult to actually understand how racism is threaded through our society at a systemic level, or how it shows up in terms of some of the microaggressions. So for part of the reason I think racism is more challenging and not the most challenging of oppressions, but very challenging, is because as a society, we're still not as convinced about whether or not racism really exists, and we're constantly looking for evidence. And the way that systemic racism operates is it allows us to doubt its existence. So our systemic belief systems, the ideology that we have, makes it very difficult for us to fess up and say, we have a problem with racism in our society, we have a problem with racism in our organisations. And because we doubt its existence, it makes it more difficult for us to work on it. So I think that's essentially how it operates, and it continues to renew itself and to remake itself and to make its existence normative. Because I think the other challenge we have is I don't think we believe that we can actually get rid of racism. We think it's just part of the DNA and the fabric within our society.
Thanks, Joy. And I mean, there's something for me in terms of when we think about racism, is sort of recognizing how it, works at different levels in terms of, how we relate to it. So there's something about, the stuff that's in intrapersonal, so our internalized beliefs. And our worldview. So a bit, as we were talking about, that sort of normalization of the acceptance of racism. And the other side of it is that, of whiteness on the other side, perhaps, is a concept and a dominating worldview. And then there's the things about how we interact with others. So we're on the intrapersonal. And then, as you talked about, it's a bit about how it shows up in our organisations in terms of policies, practices, even the culture of what's acceptable or what's not, and what's talked about, what's not. And then the sort of structural piece, which is that it's the sort of the cumulative piece over time, is how this gets embedded in all of our structures. So the health service is just one of our institutions that it is embedded in. It's embedded in all of our institutions across society. And actually, we often don't see it, or we choose not to see it in terms of our worldview. And one of the things that I was just going to reflect on is that, therefore, the power that whiteness has. So, as a white person, it's been very easy through the majority of my life to walk through the world and not have to interrogate or notice the perhaps advantages that having a white skin colour gives me. And to recognise that, that I have a racialised identity as well in terms of whiteness. And those are things that we often don't spend time, certainly I as a white person, and I know other colleagues I have spoken with and other people, we don't interrogate what it means for us to be white. And also we just accept that, whiteness is gives us a dominant worldview about what's normal or even what's seen as professional or credible. So those sorts of things tend to give me, more advantage in the workplace than someone of global majority, a person of colour, someone who has black or brown skin, who has to navigate, the effects of racism on an everyday basis. So it's whiteness that often goes unnamed and is sort of part of a sort of power system that you can't see unless you start to open your eyes. And I guess that's part of the work that we do, is helping people to see that whiteness affects everyone, not just me, but that sort of dominant worldview, and that we all have racialized identities. But I'm really interested to hear, your views on that in terms of how sort of whiteness shows up in our organisations as well.
Yeah, I mean, it can be quite triggering, I think, for people to talk about whiteness, because I don't think, and this is where it becomes a little bit discombobulating, people understand that we're not necessarily talking about people who are white-skinned. We're talking about a sort of the practice, the culture, and the belief systems, which all form part of what we would consider to be our normal society, the way in which we do things around here. And that way of doing things is often devoid of anything that is outside that prescription of what we consider to be normal and the status quo. So it's it's quite a thin line that we tread. And it means that it's really difficult for us to imagine what goes on outside of those perspectives. And because it is normalized, because it's like the air that we breathe, we don't see it. It's like fish don't see the water that they're swimming in. And once we start to unpick it, it can be much easier to see. So I've worked with colleagues who've said, I actually see this everywhere now, Joy. I didn't see it at all before, but now my eyes have been open to it. I can see how racism is normalized as part of the structure and processes within our society. So it's a difficult concept to get your head around, but once you do get your head around it and you can depersonalize it and you can recognize it as a system, it's really possible to be able to see how you can then intervene in that system.
Yeah, and I think, and I would, echo that in terms of my own lived experience, that I would say really until I was in my mid-40s, I might have been aware of white skin colour, but I didn't really think about what that meant in terms of ever interrogating my white identity and what that actually meant, or recognising that I had a racialised identity as well. That I would always, look at my racialized identity in terms of other people, rather than looking at it in terms of my own. So I think that's, one of the things to sort of think about in terms of this and focus on. But I also wanted to sort of just talk about as well that, some white presenting people can also be, racialized and discriminated against. So we've got people who are Jewish, traveller groups who do experience discrimination. And, I think particularly with the world where it is at the moment, we spend a lot of time talking about racialized identities in the terms of the social construct of race, but just to sort of recognise that that's a tricky topic as well that comes up.
It is a tricky topic, and I think just to wade in a little bit there, Anne-Marie, that if one of the wonderful tricky things about racism is it makes us believe that race is real. So you talked about race being socially constructed. And then what that means is that if we can group people, and grouping in and of itself, it can be so crude, it can be diminishing because it's blobbing people together and saying, you don't have identities outside of something that we kind of want to put on you. But once you begin to do that, you can then discriminate against that group. So as you've said, as soon as you start to say there's a group of people here and they are like this, as soon as you start to attach some characteristics and some identities to them, we can then go through that process of discrimination.
And so again, I was sort of thinking, and the sort of anti-racism work, at its core, it really speaks to power, doesn't it? About like who has power, who does not. Systems of whiteness predicated on power. So if we think of, that white system that we are swimming in, and we're all swimming in the UK. What we invite people into is to ask perhaps some questions and start to think about that. So things like, who defines then the rules about who is or is not, deemed to be in a racialized minority or category? What goes on there? Who benefits from the current system? And we often don't think about that side of it. And then who's left out, perhaps, or harmed by it? And so it's inviting people to have a bit more of an expansive view, I think, really, and to sort of recognise that, power is always at play in relationship with each other, and societies and institutions are just made up of people who are in relationship with one another. So how does that power sort of show up, and who does it serve, who does it not serve, and why those sort of structural systems continue to be reinforced?
I think we're often accused of talking about some sort of mandy-pandy abstract construction. Like many organisations say, yeah, what do you want to do about this? Where's the action plan? But unless you can understand how this stuff moves in the background. And really what we're talking about is root causes here. So what are the things that are continuing to maintain this relationship that we take for granted between the haves and the have-nots and the in-groups and the out-groups? Unless we begin to understand that we're all caught up in this and we all contribute to this, we're not really affecting and using our power well. So we all have power in this. And what we choose to do with it is really part of what we're trying to do on the Activate programme. We're trying to help people to actually understand what's going on in the background, as I've said, but also how they begin to notice some of the systems of oppression, some of the things that are very normalized that we take for granted, some of the ways that we speak and treat other people, and how all of this becomes part of a system that we say we want to intervene in, but often, even when we say we want to do something to address inequality, the ways in which we do that actually can reinforce the inequality that we're trying to address. And really getting your head around that the root causes of this is it's really aligned to how we unravel and untangle and begin to make sustainable change in some of this messiness that we see ourselves in.
Mm. And so if we're sort of thinking of, this exploring what it means for us in organisations, there are a couple of things that you think we should really pay attention to in our structures, in our organisations around what's happening around racism and what's happening perhaps around anti-racist practice?
A couple of things I think we should pay attention to. I think we should pay attention to if things feel easy. So I sit on the board of a trust, and we're often debating the current challenges, which I'm sure many people on this call know more intimately than I do. And it doesn't feel easy. It feels very tense. It feels extremely challenging to make some of the decisions that we're asked to make. Often I go out of the room and I'm sort of wondering, whether I'm doing a good job. I question whether, patients are going to be benefited, staff are going to be asked to do too much again, all of those stuff. But I can honestly say that when it comes to working into issues of equality and diversity, I doubt very much people feel that level of angst. So often when we're presented with the data, when we are reviewing our obligations towards this agenda, I'm not sure whether we're often going deep enough, whether we're looking at action and thinking, will this action really address some of the challenges that we have in our trust or in our organisation, or does it just look good on the action plan? Often people say things to me like, we're going to do this because another organisation or another trust is going to do that with no evidence. And I think one of the things that I would sit with is, am I prepared to feel uncomfortable and disrupted? Because I think if it feels too easy, then actually it probably is. And I think for lots of us, it's been too easy. We've not really second guessed a lot of the work we've been doing in this area. So we've had intentions, but we haven't necessarily made the impact that we say we want to make.
Mm. And I recognise that both on a sort of organisational, structural level and on a personal level as well, because, sometimes it can feel, hard to enter into this work in terms of having conversations or challenging, and you've got to keep, it's something you have to keep on pushing with. And actually, when it's easy, it perhaps means you're stepping out of it a bit more, so it's the sort of recognition that, to go in and sort of face what is going on. And it can feel like a continual sort of push for change and wanting something to be different. And no surprise, because when we're talking about the social construct of race, it's been in existence for 400 years. So, it has become such a part of our world and how we view society that actually, if you're pushing up against that, of course you're going to find resistance. And it's to sort of recognise, how do you sort of keep managing yourself when you're facing resistance. So I'm wondering if that means we should sort of move more into the sort of the accountability part of the conversation that we wanted to have, in terms of, what are leaders then, and need to do? What are those who are working in our organisations, in our services, really, what sort of things could they do if we recognise that many of the things that have been tried in the past have not really had much impact? So what sort of things, Joy, are you seeing that could help, that perhaps people could focus on?
I think there's a need to look at the evidence. So we often engage in a bit of a dance where we're doing the same sorts of things that we've always done. I feel like I say that a lot, but we are doing a lot of the same things that we've always done in the hope that it's actually going to shift the dial. Often it shifts the dial incrementally, but not at pace. And given that a lot of the organisations that we're working with have 30%, sometimes 40, even 50% people from global majority or Black or Asian or minority ethnic backgrounds, or all the words Black and brown, or however we want to talk about it. What we're seeing is an organisation then that potentially is not as fair as it wants to be and not fit for purpose. So it's not able to deliver the same levels of opportunities and equity in equal proportion. So I think one of the things that people ignore is the evidence. And I think we get sucked in because there's a little bit of it can be being in good company. Everybody's doing that sort of stuff. So we're not out of kilter. So if everyone is putting someone of Black or brown on the recruitment panel, let's do that. So we kind of get caught up in that regard and not looking at return on investment and the evidence around that. I mean, just from your perspective, Anne-Marie, what are people missing and ignoring in relation to this?
I mean, I think from my perspective, and the work we've been doing, I'll speak a bit about perhaps what we're trying to do within the King's Fund, as well as the sort of the work that we're trying to do outside as well, is that recognition of how policies and procedures can uphold the sort of structural elements of racism, and that sort of starts with an assumption that there is a level playing field. And so there, when we talk about sort of fairness or meritocracy, it's sort of saying, well, you can't possibly advantage one group against another. It should all be fair and open and transparent, without recognizing that some people will have not had the same level of access, experience, or even have had racialized experiences in the past. It means that they are not so free and able to come forward to speak up, and that can apply to other sort of minority groups and experiences as well. But it's sort of think about how those things, well, we sit with we must all be fair. And actually, if we're thinking about this work and we're thinking about equity, then sometimes that means that not, we don't look at everybody having to start from the same starting point, because recognizing that different lived experiences will give people different starting points when it comes to, how you apply for a job, how you write a job application, how you approach an interview, how you come across an interview, the biases that you are facing in an interview. Whether you even see people who look like you at interview that make you feel that it might be safe to work here or a good place to work, all of those sorts of things can be going on in organisations. So how do you actually address some of that? And I would say, as an organisation, we are very white, in terms of our identity and our makeup as a whole. And I think particularly with the policy work that we do, there are certain types of people who gravitate towards that and have had backgrounds in that. And that leads to perhaps I won't say a certain way of thinking, but perhaps a certain way of assuming that people with certain backgrounds are going to be best for this. So it's starting to, how do you challenge some of that and look more broadly? So I think that, there's work to be done. So I would say hopefully that's sort of an example that starts to bring it alive a bit for people and gets them to sort of think about, okay, what are those structural things that are starting to reinforce this? And then I think the other thing for me would be, to not to go on another listening exercise and say we need more data about what people's experiences are, is to look at the experiences that we can see, look at what the data already tells us. You said look at some of the evidence and say, okay, so what does that tell us? And what might we then need to do, differently? How should we address different people's perceptions, experiences in the workplace, and really address them wholly and credibly, because I think often there's a lot of fear associated with trying to address anything regarding to race or racism, in terms of, am I going to, say the wrong thing? So those are some of the things that I think people miss, because they won't, it's the silence, we silence ourselves and don't speak up, which means that we can either miss people's experiences, or we don't listen to people's experiences because we actually don't want to hear perhaps what they're trying to tell us, because, we're good people. And particularly for white people, it's this, I'm not racist, I'm a good white person, much of the stuff that Robin DiAngelo speaks about. So it's enabling yourself to sit with that discomfort. Maybe there's some stuff here that has, advantaged me that I haven't, been directly party to because it's in society, but I have benefited from. So what am I going to do with it? And that for me is then sort of stepping into the accountability piece. Well, actually, I can step in and I can do something. I don't know whether I answered that. It was a bit of a roundabout way and perhaps brought in a few things.
No, I mean, there were lots of things in there. And I think, I suppose one of the things that I was picking up from what you said was this idea of, our inherent biases, and and the way the world is made, so that, the gravitation of some people to the top and others to the bottom. And I wonder whether the bit that I think we find very challenging in terms of missing and ignoring, and you alluded it to that in what you said, Anne-Marie, was our accountability for it. So the fact that, we're often the people sitting on the interview panels, we're often the people making the decisions, and we can sometimes look that way and kind of go, well, didn't have the right qualifications, didn't have the right levels of experiences, and there seems to be quite a lot of noise about why people aren't able to succeed and why people aren't able to thrive. But I think that's getting slightly tired now. There's a lot of data about people who, are just as qualified, sometimes overqualified, still don't get the, get the levels of reward that they would seemingly get if they were somebody else. So I think that we have to lay off the excuses a little bit. I think there's a need to face into this. If we're going to make the change, there's some harsh realities I think that we need to begin to face up to in terms of our ability to drive this forward. And I suppose part of what Activate does, it makes it slightly uncomfortable with people, but with very good reason, is it forces you to look a little bit at yourself and things that you didn't see, things that you didn't notice, things that you were unaware of and oblivious to, and how those are the very things that create discrimination and disadvantage.
And I think as well, when we're working on the Activate programme, we talk a bit about the concept of sort of third order change, which is the transformation that happens in us as leaders or as individuals. And, going back to the title of this session, the change, you've got to be the change that you want to see. So you've got to start, with yourself. If you're not prepared to do that work on yourself and to start to see things differently, and then hold yourself accountable for the actions that you can take to make a difference. So, for example, one of the things that I do in the King Sundays, I just set up an open space with my colleagues, the other colleagues who are working the leadership and organisational development team in particular, where we come together on a monthly basis and we just have conversations about anti-racism. No agenda, but just actually bring things that are coming up for us. And it just allows us to have a space to talk about some of the things that otherwise we don't bring necessarily to the top of the agenda. And by having it monthly, it allows us to continue to sort of focus on it. And my role is someone trying to, show some sort of role in leadership and accountability in this space. Say, well, that's something I can do quite easily. It's an hour of our time. It's not there's no prep, and I can just invite people in and hold that space so that we can have some quite difficult conversations. And colleagues have said, actually, that has helped move a lot of people's thinking on in this space, but also just give a space where we can come together in terms of in solidarity, really, to think about, what we might do differently and then how we might apply that to some of our work. And I'm not saying to everyone that is the answer, because if I could, if that was the answer, then we'd say to everybody, yeah, do it. I mean, so I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying it's one small thing. So I think what I'm inviting people to do is to think about, what is the thing you can do? What have you got within your power that you can do to make change? And that's really the sort of third order change, is trying to see it within yourself and then think about what you can do.
I think just to wade in a little bit there, Anne-Marie, if I may, there's something that you said there about being able to stick with things being uncomfortable. So I was a co-author of a report that was launched around this time last year, actually. It's just over a year ago, Too Hot to Handle, which was looking in particular at racism in the NHS. And I think that what we have got to get to terms with is what we look like in the mirror. Because we sit in organisations and we often say, we want to hear it, tell us about racism, tell us about things that happen to you. But when we are confronted by it, it's not us. It's not us that did it. It's a lot of the people that did our poll in that work, and generously lots of people commented and said that lots of times when we try and say to people, this has happened to us and we've had a racist experience, we are not believed. So there's something about how the organisations can dismiss, can diminish experiences, but that isn't the organisation. That is us. We are part of these organisations. And how is it that we stand in something that's really uncomfortable, to know that at some part, some time in our lives, we would have condoned racism. We might have actually been racist ourselves. We might have been, part of something we didn't even want to be part of, and seeing it. So it's really sticky and awkward and difficult. But if we don't ever get to the point where we can breathe and accept those things are actually happening and we are the perpetrators of those things, I don't think we're going to get past we're not going to get to past this sticking point where it's not the policies. It is got to be us facing into our operation, the way in which we operationalize our policies, the way in which we do business, the way in which we are, as you said, Anne-Marie, the change we want to see. So it's incumbent upon us, really, and I think that's the bit that we find harder to hear and take accountability for.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think, a few years ago, I was working with a colleague, a woman of colour, and we were working very closely together. And she called me out in terms of something that was going on in the organisation that I was party to, that actually was, structural racism within our team. And I had to take a long, hard look at myself and my partner. I didn't want to hear it at first. And actually, with that, her patience and her understanding and helping me to sort of see through and we held each other through it. It helped me to grow. But when we then tried to call it out within the organisation, it was really difficult. We wanted others to learn from the experience that we'd had, but we came up against sort of fear and denial. Others weren't prepared to go into that space. So for me, there's something about that recognition that I have to confront and call out my own racism, before I can actually step into the space of trying to be anti-racist. I have to acknowledge it sits, you know, it sits within me. And we talk about on the program, don't we, that, you know, it doesn't just sit within white people, you know, it sits within everyone, you know. Do you want
It's
to
a
say a little bit more
system.
about that? Yeah.
It's a system. It's like patriarchy. You know, women can, you know, quite easily be sexist. And it's the same model of oppression that, you know, people who are racialized as background, people of color, we can um, transmit racism. And, you know, Derek Bell, who was a civil rights leader in the States, actually talks about it. He talks about how, as do other writers, how this is not something that, because you are a person of color or from global majority background, you are free of. You can experience racism, absolutely, and, you know, often you walk into it. It's not, you know, you just, it just rocks up. You think, all right, I'm waking up today. It's going to be a good day, and then something happens, and you think, oh, there it is again. But we can also dish it out. So, you know, one of the things that we do have to understand about this structure of oppression, this racialized oppression, this term racism, is that because it is a system, people can pick it up, use it, and be advantaged by that system. And we see that in our society as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So any final thoughts before perhaps we move into taking some questions? Anything else you wanted to say, perhaps about the sort of performative nature of accountability versus what people can actually do?
I think we've travelled over it quite a bit, actually. I think that hopefully people are getting the sense from us that there is something about putting yourself in there. There's something about being prepared to be disrupted. There's something about your appetite for change, and how we have often colluded with the lowest common denominators of interventions which don't get us where we need to get to, with any kind of pace or with any kind of sustainability. I mean, I would also say, although this isn't what you quite asked me for, Anne-Marie, that we are working with organisations now who are recognising that they're going nowhere fast on this agenda, and are beginning to ask themselves this question, because we've had the workforce rate equality standard since 2015, so it's 10 years, isn't it?
Mm.
And I think we're also recognizing that counting something, whether it moves up or down or stays the same, is not the same as actually making interventions into those statistical disparities that we see. And I think for many people, they're kind of realizing that having a meeting where we kind of look at the trends doesn't help us if we don't understand racism and anti-racism. So there's a kind of analytical lens that we haven't got, or many of us haven't got, or as many of us that need to have it haven't got it, that will help us to address this huge inequality. But if we don't put that lens on, we can count and subdivide and do as much as we want to and have another report commissioned, but we're still not going to make a dent in the agenda.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Joy. And I think, you know, for me, it would just be going back to the accountability starts with ourselves. You know, we've got to start to look at what we accept and what we don't accept, you know, and what we normalize and what we actually are willing to interrogate. And how do we do that on a really, you know, a regular basis rather than just when it sort of hits us in the face, like, you know, the riots last year did. But to sort of think about what is the lived experience for everyone going on that allows those things to happen. So I'm gonna move us into some questions. There's been quite a few coming up in the chat as we've been going through. So I'm gonna try and I've tried to make a note of some as they come through, but
You've done a
um,
good job on that, multitasking,
there's
talking to me and making a note of the questions.
there's been a lot. So I'm going to miss names, and I'm probably going to paraphrase for some of those. But somebody has asked. Well, we had a question about Diane Abbott, and actually what Diane Abbott has said about racism. Is there anything wrong with what she said about her, the experience? So I don't know. But, it's a big one to start with,
It's a
Joy.
big one to start with, probably a good one to start with. I think behind that question is this assumption that we can talk about this and get it right for everyone. And I think that's a very challenging assumption, because it feels like it should be absolutely clear, but it isn't clear. Even for somebody like me who is very used to talking about these issues, and I think I'm being really clear and I'm being really precise and I'm using all the right terminology, it can somebody can pick it up and kind of go, no, that's not within my understanding of it. And part of it is because we have an emotional response to what we hear. I think that people have different experiences of discrimination. I think that the way that we work with issues of discrimination often means that we compete. So we don't. The way that we actually deal with this, if you think about social movements, if individuals have had to campaign for to be seen as to have the opportunity to say, actually, something's happened to us and this is really wrong. And I suppose that competitive nature of how we see oppression, it still continues into how we want to talk about it. So I've been in organizations where people have said, well, yeah, it's all good doing something about race, but what about gender? What about this? What about whatever? I mean, we often say in the program, we are really, I suppose we're capable of, as human beings, to handle more than one issue at a time. So I think that you often get forced to talk about things in competitive ways. I think that it's really important that we recognise that people are intersectional, people do have different experiences of discrimination. And I don't think it's really helpful to get drawn into whose experience is worse or better. It's not a helpful way to begin to frame the agenda, and it's not engaging, because it doesn't help people to understand that we can all engage in it, and we all have a stake in making our society better.
Mm. And I think there's something, going back to Audre Lorde's words about there is no hierarchy of oppression, and actually, systemic racism, in a way, one of the reinforcing structures is, having different groups who have been othered competing for time, resources, energy, that allows things like systemic racism or systemic sexism or any of the other elements to continue to flourish, because actually it's easier to, have groups pitted against one another for resources and not challenge the current status quo. So it's part of the way it works in the structure in our society. And some people exploit that as well, in terms of, using division and divisiveness to actually enable a system that benefits them to continue. So it's that sort of thing that comes through for me.
I agree, and while we're talking about what somebody says, we're not actually addressing racism, are we?
No.
We're kind of trying to find the right words, or we're not addressing any of the negative experiences that people have. And I think that it is really clear that for some people, discrimination can be easily put on them because you can see that they're different.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't mean that it's better or worse. It just means that you can see that some people are actually made to be different. And that means that it's easier to point them out and to discriminate against them.
Yeah, yeah. And others will have that experience of when they're outed in terms of their difference.
Yeah.
So if you're Jewish, you may sort of pass in society and then somebody finds out you're Jewish, and then something like the discrimination might happen in terms of anti-Semitism. So it's those sorts of things. Or if you're gay, the same sort of thing might happen to you. So that, this new, and that's why it's complicated, isn't it? There's sort of nuances around this. Another question we've had: how do you maintain momentum and focus about anti-racism in the face of white fragility, whataboutism, and other divisive narratives?
Oh, I've just realised if you ask the questions, I have to answer them.
I
We
know
have to
it's good,
reverse
isn't
the
it?
order.
I had worked that out.
Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's about not, it's continuing the conversation. And I think a lot of this is actually, how do we stay in relationship with others? So the whataboutery is resistance. So we talk a lot about, calling things out for people, and calling things out can be needed and it can be hard and decisive. You said something was unacceptable, that was racist. It absolutely has its place. But if you want to stay in relationship with people and you're trying to get underneath that whataboutery, you can try some of the things that we would call sort of calling in. So stay in inquiry. Why do you think it's okay to sort of talk about something in that way? What's going on for you? Where does that thinking come from? So those are some of the tools that I would certainly use when I'm sort of trying to deal with, the whataboutery, the white fragility, and also just call it that, I often call noticing the superpower, and I call that across much of the work that I do, not just in anti-racism, whether that's organisational development, relational work, but just noticing, oh, I noticed that made me feel uncomfortable, or that made me feel like this, and offering that to people. Or I noticed that, what we're seeing in this, in this room is actually, all of the white people are speaking, and perhaps, none of the people of colour are, or there aren't people here, or I'm speaking on someone's behalf, or, so it's starting to notice things, what's going on here. So it's that sense of staying in inquiry, I think, can help when you're in some of those divisive narratives. Why is that? Asking people if they're coming back with something, what is going on for you? What is sitting underneath that? Did you, and I know you use those sort of things too as well, Joy.
Yeah, I would just add a couple of things. I think we're all learning. I think this is, I have more books than shelves. This is constant learning. I think that for many people who are white, there's this belief system which I try and smash really, which is that there's a belief that you can't get this stuff. There's absolutely no reason why people can't get this stuff if they want to. And if they want to continue to work at it, it's like a practice that you can get better at it. And part of you getting better at that, I think, is this issue of recovery. So it's like, I don't know, when a colleague of mine uses this lovely analogy, when a baby's starting to walk and it falls down, you don't go, oh, that baby's fallen down, it'll never walk again. You kind of pick it back up, you dust it off, you let it do its little thing. And I think we need to work on that more. We need to recognize that we can recover from mistakes and we're all going to make them in this area. It's harder with the cancel culture actually, which is really not helpful. It doesn't ever allow us to recover because it's always out there in one way, shape, or another. So our society, I think, makes it really difficult. But I would really encourage people to believe they can recover from this and they can get better at this agenda.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'm just, I'm sort of noticed as I'm reading some of the questions in the chat that, some of those are going to be, I'm feeling even triggered by things. Oh, have I said the right thing here? Because I don't, I'm here, I'm still learning. I'm not always getting it right, but actually what we want to try and do is to share where we are and enable us. And and what I would say in the Activate program is that we learn from others when they bring their experiences and their stories as well. So whilst we are supporting, people on Activate to really think about their anti-racist practice, often people bring things in as well, so it's constant. I mean, it's never ending, the learning journey. We're never going to have got this completely right. I know exactly what to do, and I've got everything right all the time. So I think, and sometimes that sort of quest for perfectionism that sits again in whiteness is like, oh, I must always get it right. So it can be more difficult to acknowledge when perhaps I haven't got all the answers, and particularly as a someone who's facilitating or trying to, sort of lead in this work, to even acknowledge that we don't necessarily have all the answers all the time. There is more out there than we know, and
Mm.
others are also working in this space and can share things that they are learning too.
I think the other thing is it's really difficult to talk about this stuff succinctly. It's almost like you need a bit of a background in it in order to talk about it well. And often we're trying to do, we've kind of got into that world where there's a headline or two, and it just, everything sometimes gets really taken out of context. And I think that what would really help is if we could sit with our learning on this, if we could be energized by what we don't understand. And I think
Mm.
that does link to that thing about we have to believe that we can understand it and that we can get better at this. And I think that's really what is the heart of many of the things that we do in terms of development program, giving people an understanding that this is stuff that you can grab, you can take, you can run with, you can work at. It doesn't have to be something so mysterious. There's nothing mysterious about the pain of Black women. There's nothing mysterious about people out there that you don't yet know. It's all of this is something that we have put there as a barrier to interaction and a way in which we maintain this them and us thing. So there's a real opportunity, I think, for us to all think about how we work on that and break that down.
Thanks, Joy. I'm conscious we're in the last few minutes, and I know there are lots of questions that we haven't been able to touch on or answer. Um, I would like to get some feedback from you as well, and I know some people need to go. So if you're able to give us some feedback on today's session, that would be great. So you can scan the QR code, and it will take you to a form where you can give us some feedback. So we'd really welcome that. Or if there's anything that you want to put in the Q&A chat, to sort of tell us that anything that you would really value. And as we said, I said right at the beginning, we literally have scratched the surface of some of these concepts. We do have the Activate program. So if you are interested and would like to know more, I'll put some links up in a minute where there are links to our website, but they'll also be sent out to you if you want to find out more. And I know a few people have also asked about this has been recorded. So asking, has it been recorded? Yes. And also what resources are available. And we'll give you some links to, we've got a resources page at the King's Fund on a lot of the work that we've done on anti-racism and links to it. There's a fantastic blog from Joy and a colleague of mine, Simon, talking about from not racist to anti-racist, which will give you a bit of a flavour of some of those concepts that we've been talking about today. And if you are interested to know more, then please reach out to us and contact us for more information about the Activate programme. We'd love to continue this conversation with you. So that's the feedback form. A little bit about our programme. 3 months, our next cohort is starting in September. So if you are interested in that, please have a look at our website. A bit about BRAP and the fantastic Joy, so you can read a bit about BRAP. We really value the partnership that we have them and the thinking that they bring into this work in terms of actually sharing it more broadly across the health service and wider. And then there's a link to some of our resources. As I said, when it comes through afterwards, you'll be able to click into any of those links. But if you can search on our website and look for information, King's Fund Anti-Racist Resources, and those will pop up and give you access to some of those books and things that we've also been talking about. Joy, final word as we finish today.
Just thank you for attending. It makes me think, just looking at the chat, because one of the feedbacks I think is maybe we just could do with a discussion evening, and maybe we invite people in good faith to have some conversations about this, where we can take some of these questions, because one of my, it would have been good to have got to more questions, but maybe we need a bit more space and time to do that.
Can always do more time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope it's been of value to you. So we'll look forward to reading your feedback. Thanks, everyone.